Hello everyone, my name is Paul and welcome back to the new news. I hope that everyone's having a fantastic day. I hope that you, your family, and your friends are safe, and if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. There's a ton of stuff that is happening all throughout the world today, and as you can certainly tell on the map, but unfortunately, as usual, most of this stuff isn't good. A lot of this stuff has to do with human suffering, and there's a lot of people that are affected by these different situations throughout the globe. And that's why here at the New News, 100% of everything that we do is for charity. We are 100% trying to just try and help people throughout the world, inform you on what's going on, and to raise money to help people through different various organizations that are all linked in the description. 70% or more of the donations that those organizations receive go to their programs, go to helping people, and while only 30% or less go to things such as salaries and administration's costs. So I please implore you, check out the video description and check out all of the wonderful organizations that are down there. If you can't give a lot to these organizations, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, that's okay too. Please go ahead and try and help us grow this project, because the more people that come here and watch this, the more people that can come in and donate and can help these organizations. And of course, once we get to a large enough viewer base, of course, we'll be able to put donations and fundraisers directly to each of these streams, which is the hope. And so thank you very much for that support. Those likes and subscribes and things like that really do help this channel and help this project as we continue on here. And it's amazing to see the support we've already gotten. And as we continue here kind of through the morning, or through this nightly announcements section, so we will not be streaming tonight, or we will not be streaming tomorrow night or on Friday night. So I apologize, I almost said tonight. We will not be streaming on Thursday or Friday night, because tomorrow night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, we are going to be premiering our short documentary on 1 year in Ukraine. It's something that we've been working on for a while now, and we have finally finished off. It is now setting as a premiere for you guys. We are exactly 24 hours away from that debuting, of course, and that does mark at 10 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, does mark exactly 1 year to the hour of the start of the full-scale invasion, which the announcement came from President Putin at 6 a.m. on Moscow time, or 10 p.m. Eastern time. Also, that is when the start of the UN Security Council meeting began. So that was also synced up there. So I hope that you guys will join us for that premiere and watching that, supporting us through that. And hopefully you end up, if you haven't been watching these, you end up learning a lot of things that you may or may not have known before, or at least refreshing some of these things that haven't been talked about for a while. If you have questions as we go through the news here, please feel free to ask them here in the live chat. I am watching the live chat, as I am every single night. Erevis and JL, it's happy to see you guys back. I know JL and Erevis are both very busy all the time, so I'm glad that you guys still find time for this. And with that, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. I'll answer them to the very best of my ability right here live on stream. And to give you a little bit of a background on myself, if you happen to be new here, I started the Marine Corps between 2016 and 2020. I was a anti-tank missileman at 0352, and I was a corporal with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines out of 29 Palms, California. And I did 2 tours to the Middle East during my time in the Marine Corps. My first tour was between October of 2017 and March of 2018, where I spent roughly 4.5 months in the country of Syria, attached to Special Operations Forces as part of the fight against the Islamic State under Operation Inherent Resolve. During my time there, I was all around the northeastern regions of Syria, specifically Al-Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor provinces. And spent a lot of time with, of course, Special Operations Forces, but also the SDF Kurdish and Arab forces that were partnered with us in the locals there in the region. And then coming back home, I ran an armory for about 2.5 years as a secondary duty within my unit, and then before redeploying back to the Middle East between October of 2019 and March of 2020. During that time, I was the Javelin team leader for the Crisis Response Company out of Kuwait, where I spent the most of my time. But on New Year's 2020, I was one of the 100 Marines that responded to the Baghdad Embassy complex there as it was being attacked by 4,000 protesters and the Katiba Hezbollah militants that were there as well. Spent about a month and a half there before rotating down into Saudi Arabia and training Saudi Arabian Marines headed for the Red Sea, or headed for Yemen while I was there in the Red Sea, as well as also continuing that training of Special Operations Forces too. I am a subject matter expert in anti-armor warfare and armored doctrine. I also am a small unit leader. I do understand small unit leadership tactics, of course, but I was never formally trained in the strategic scale. I'm also a fully cross-trained rifleman, a fully cross-trained machine gunner, a partially cross-trained radio operator, as well as a CLS, or Combat Lifesaver Certified Marine, and I do have real-world experience providing aid to real casualties that do have trauma injuries to them as a result of different fighting and other aspects going on there. So if you have any questions outside of that, try to remain very well rounded. I'm interested in history, geopolitics, science, astronomy, all sorts of things. But I always implore that you as the viewer, please do your own research, because there is no substitute. And if you would like a starting point, these maps, including this one tonight, is all made available on our website. They're already on there. The link is also in the description below. And with that, we can now jump right here and into the news, which, of course, we start with our special reports coming out of Ukraine, which has been the main topic of the news channel since we started it back in March of last year. And we actually start off, instead of in Kyiv this time, we actually start off here in Western Ukraine. It was not specified, as, of course, these training locations are undisclosed. However, we do know that these are happening in the safer regions of Ukraine, so very safe to say in the western parts, where we see that NATO standardization does continue. This is something that we have touched on before, especially when talking about the 47th Assault Brigade, which is being formed. And we see that once again here, this time with a very fresh batch of Ukrainian National Guard recruits that are actually training to become part of the Azov Brigade. Of course, that Azov regiment's fighting in places around Huliopol. Of course, the Battle of Mariupol comes to mind for most people, but actually a unit within the National Guard of Ukraine. And the interesting part of this training is not necessarily what they're doing. It's very mundane rifle range tasks, but it's what they're using, the equipment. And that really tells us, you know, on top of the tactics and things that we're seeing out of Ukrainian forces now as they shifted throughout this war to fighting in a very different doctrinal style, we see their equipment shifting with that as the supplies and aid from NATO nations is coming in here. And you start seeing the standardization amongst their forces. And this is you know, in many different aspects. Every single recruit you're about to see is using an M16A4 chambered in 5.56 by 4.5 NATO. It's also a standard. It's also the standard issued rifle for the United States Marine Corps. And then they are all equipped with Elcan C79s. These are 3.5 power magnified optics, usually used for the 240s and 249s, but they are available. You can use them for rifle scopes. They're also using the modern combat helmets. It's very difficult to tell the variants without seeing the inside of them. But we can identify them as being either the lightweight helmets or the advanced combat helmets, LWH, ACH, as well as, of course, every single one has standardized combat vests or ballistic vests with the inserts in them, meaning they do have those SAPI plates, and they're all running the PMags, and there's a lot of minute details that really tell you just how much each soldier is getting attended to, how much small equipment that they're doing here, and it's very interesting to watch as this is shifting from, you know, AK series weaponry, really Soviet era weaponry. And it really kind of, you know, like I said, it really pinpoints that. And you can see that here. Everything all standardized. Everyone is completely standardized here. That is the lovely M16A4. And of course, it has that 4-rail mount. It does not have a 4-rail mount on there, or quad rail mount like I am used to. It's just that slick barrel cover there. But we can see running those PMags or a similar type of magazine to a PMag. And that is the Elcan C79 scope that we're seeing them operating there. It's not their Spectre series, from what I can identify anyway. But this is pretty much exactly what you would expect from NATO support. This is exactly what you expect from Western support. You know, the ammunition types, the weapons types, the equipment that's being utilized. And you can see every single person is issued with this in this entire group. So once again, a very standardized regimen, very standardized group here. And that speaks volumes about really how this war is going to be fought here in the future. as we do move into that 1 year. And the reason why is because, you know, we've seen at the beginning of the war, Ukraine, while they have been receiving support since 2014 and have done training, I have personally had guys I knew in the Marine Corps that went to Ukraine to train them on the Javelin system, that I went through, school and stuff with there, in the Marine Corps. And, it's still very early on, you're seeing that, it's all former Soviet tactics. They're basically fighting exactly the same as the Russians are, with javelins and in-laws, though, which make a huge difference. And then, of course, you get the Bayraktar, and then that carries over, and you continue to see that aid really pile on very quickly after the Russian forces have withdrawn from the Kyiv and Chernihiv and Sumy regions. But the types of support you're seeing, at the end of the day, all of that stuff that happens, it doesn't matter, the tanks, jet aircraft, helicopters, artillery, all of this stuff is fine and dandy, and it's easier to do a good job with better tools. They break less often, and they're always going to be more effective. But at the end of the day, the basic rifleman is going to be the guy that is going to win the war. As long as he is supplied, because logistics and economies win wars, but there still has to be someone that jumps into that trench. And so when you're seeing this standardization, this NATO shift in tactics and equipment, you're seeing the investment into every basic infantryman, using CAT, combat application tourniquets, using, standard NATO equipment, NATO ammunition, the M855A1 ball round specifically designed to punch through body armor. Maybe doesn't do as good as 6.5 Blackout, but it does. And you're seeing rifle optics. Most of the time, Russian forces, they're running iron sights. So any kind of optic you can give allows you to more accurately engage targets at further distances, meaning you are exceptionally more deadly. Everybody being issued Molly, Weave, Kevlar with SAPI plates increases survivability, increases your adaptability because of what you can mount on those Molly points. You can see this guy's running magazine pouches. He could put, his team lead could have could have a little pouch, an administrative pouch, where he opens it up and you can see a little map of the area and he can make those tactical changes. We've seen the training for their leadership also going into that, a whole rotation of officers coming from Poland, meaning they're receiving NATO training as well to lead troops that are receiving NATO training, especially in places like the UK, and use NATO doctrine, which is specifically designed to defeat the old Soviet and therefore also now the Russian doctrine, as we can see by their doctrinal by the Russian doctrine being published, especially thanks to the embassy of the UK in Northern Ireland. Right online, we can see what their doctrine is, and we can see it's pretty much a follow-up of Soviet doctrine, and it hasn't really changed. And that is updated as of 2014. Let's see here. So Book of 40 has a couple of questions about these. He says, are those scopes good? I've never used a C79. My combat optic that I am used to using is the MDO, or medium day optic, medium day, that is, and also the RCO. The RCO is produced by Trijicon. That's a 4-power optic, fixed 4-power optic for my rifle. I carried one of those. I had originally an RCO A4. And then I moved to an RCO M7, which is the newest one that has the horseshoe reticle. Personally, I don't like it. I prefer my Chevron, but of course I'm stuck in my old ways. And I also use the MDO and the SDO, depending on if I was running a 249 or if I was running a 240, respectively, just because of the what we were trained on. But all that's provided by Trijicon. That is an American company that produces those. These are LCANs. This is a Canadian company that uses these. The U.S. does use LCANs, but predominantly the U.S. Army uses them. The Marine Corps does not. We have our own systems that we prefer for more accurate, longer range engagements. The Army, the 3.5 power, just under that 4 power zoom. We're looking at engaging targets at about 500 meters in the Marine Corps with precision rifle fire. The Army is looking at about 300, which is the medium range of engagements, historically speaking, throughout war. Is about 300 meters, which is why that is the effective range of the AK. But yeah. And he also follows that up, Buckham follows that up, as it looks like body armor is smaller than when I was in. Is that across most services? It's not necessarily, yes. So it is, but it's not. A lot of things are missing off of this that you may notice otherwise. If you look at his plates, it's very thin in the plates. That can be a couple of things. Even to me, it looks a little thin, and that's probably because he's using bare sappies, and there's probably a built-in section to prevent spalting once a round impacts that sappy plate. But my body armor had soft armor, which means I had a sappy plate, ceramic sappy plate, level 4. And then I also had, underneath it, I had a ballistic Kevlar soft plate, soft body armor that is able to stop handgun runs by their own, but it also prevents shrapnel wounds, and it also prevents that spalting from hitting you and causing damage from the little cracks and everything, and little sheets of ceramic and metal that come out once you get hit in the chest or wherever in the plate. He also doesn't have side sappies. They're small square sappies that go onto your sides to prevent rounds from impacting that side. So it's very thin there. There's a lot of things, but generally speaking, depending on how you're running your setup, what your standard operating procedure is, you may not want to wear that because this can prevent proper emplacement. They can prevent proper emplacement when you're using this. It can do a lot of things, so it's not always the most fantastic to have that. In the words of the EIS song, RPP prevents proper engagement. JL says, Paul, I can't see well the T-shirt. Is it something Army related? Yeah, actually, it is the Ukraine. So this is the Ukrainian Special Operations of Ukraine, the Agricultural Division. For those that are interested, so because there is nothing more hilarious than watching Ukrainian farmers become more armed with armored vehicles than the entirety of the Russian BGG facing them. We move on from there, and we can jump over here into Kyiv, where it's not such, fun stuff to talk about, unfortunately. And as we look here, we do see the child casualty update. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, 461 Ukrainian children have died and 926 children have been injured. Most victims among children are from the Donetsk region. Moreover, 345 Ukrainian children were reported missing and 16,221 were deported. And that's coming from the press services of the Ukrainian Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, which is quickly followed up by the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations, who stated, quote, since the beginning of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has recorded 8,006 deaths and 13,287 injuries to civilians in Ukraine. And in quotation marks, they stated, conservative estimates, real numbers are likely higher. Coming from the UN Human Rights. 8,006. The civilian casualties were recorded as 3,533 men, 2,096 women, 256 boys, and 200 girls, as well as 31 children and 1,890 adults whose sex is yet unknown. 90.3% of civilian casualties were caused by explosive weapons with wide area effects. The absolute majority of them occurred in populated areas. This goes back to what we've talked about extensively before, which is the indiscriminate bombardments of civilian infrastructure in civilian areas. This is actually, according to the Geneva Conventions, according to Additional Protocol 1 of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, which was adopted in 1977, as being actually against the laws of war. You cannot bomb civilian areas, and that both covers residential areas because of the infrastructure that is naturally there, as well as the populations and people themselves. UN Human Rights also followed up with that as well. And he says, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, actually stated, quote, "This senseless war is a blatant affront to international law. Its vast human toll must end now." Another repercussion of this war is the lowering of agricultural output. Quote, "Ukraine may reduce the production of agricultural products this year due to Russian military aggression. In particular, more than 2.6 million hectares of Ukrainian agricultural land needs demining." And that's coming from Yulia Sviridenko, who is the Minister of Economy in Ukraine. And unfortunately, Oleg Mudrak has reportedly passed away. The commander of the 1st Azov Battalion, an Azovstal veteran, Olenivka massacre survivor, and returned POW, reportedly passed away after suddenly going into cardiac arrest. He was reportedly tortured and heavily abused under Russian captivity, and photos of him in August showed him emaciated and in poor health. According to his family, he was never able to fully recover, and it is suspected that his poor condition ultimately led to his heart failure and passing. Major Oleg Mudrak spent over 100 days in captivity after surrendering at the Azovstal. And here is a side-by-side comparison. This is on May the 20th of 2022 in Mariupol. This is as the force as they surrendered in the Azovstal. And this is him back in August before he was released from Russian captivity. Converan has a couple of questions. Do nukes have expiration dates? In other words, do they have to be refilled with fissionable material now and then? What about regular maintenance? So, technically, yes. Technically, yes. And it can depend. I am not a nuclear weapons expert. So please take with what I'm getting ready to say with some grains of salt. But the nuclear material naturally, so it's radioactive, and any kind of radioactive substance, regardless of what you're talking about, has what's called a half-life, meaning that as particles of the nuclear material are literally, nuclear material is nuclear, it's radioactive because it is unstable as matter. And so it's constantly trying to move to a point of stability. And so as a result of that, there's particles, alpha and beta particles that are, shooting off of this thing, and electrons that are shooting off of this thing. And that's actually what makes radiation, some types of radiation so dangerous, is actually the size of the particle and their speed. And that's what's actually hitting you. And so as this deteriorates, as these particles are being shot off in every direction, it changes states. And so that's why you see certain elements, that's how these radioactive elements become other radioactive elements before they become, iron or whatever they're going to end up becoming at the end of it. So over time, they end up having a half-life. And it is calculated. I'm sure you could look up what U-235 and 238's half-lives are. But it is an extensive amount of time, from my understanding. They do, over time, no longer become, usable material, usable nuclear weapons, because they do degrade. But I do not know off the top of my head how long that is. But they do degrade over time, and they degrade in effectiveness the longer that goes. As for maintenance, maintenance is required very extensively. both on the facilities and on the weapons themselves. I actually used to know someone who is a master electrician in the Air Force. He actually wired nuclear silos for a long time. Very interesting individual. Absolute genius, but kind of crazy. But he was he was cool, but he reported, my understanding is he used to wire nuclear silos, and very intelligent, but that requires a lot of maintenance. Those facilities require a lot of maintenance, not just because of the security required for them, but also just because of, you want to make sure if you're launching a nuclear weapon, you have one chance. One chance. That's it. You don't get a second one. So if something goes wrong, the launch bay doors don't open in the silo, something doesn't go wrong, something doesn't correctly line up with the missile, there's an error inside of the missile itself, its guidance system isn't working, the electrical connection isn't there, the socket is dirty for the connector. A million things can go wrong with a missile, whether you're talking about Javelin or a nuclear missile. Regardless, nuclear missiles much more so because of how large they are and how complicated they need to be to do their job, but it requires an extensive amount of maintenance, and I do not know the budget for it, but if I remember correctly, the entire budget, the budget for just the US's nuclear maintenance programs are more than the entire budget of the Russian military, which maintains more nuclear weapons than the United States does. And something like over $100 billion goes to just nuclear weapons maintenance. And I believe like the entirety of the Russian maintenance, or the entirety of the Russian military budget, I think is like $65 billion a year. Of course, the U.S. spends $742 billion on our defense budget, so take that with how you will. We jump down here and into Crimea. This one's actually geolocated to its location. And we see that fighting does continue here in the Luhansk sector. Fighting around the woods around Crimea does continue as both Russian and Ukrainian forces vie for control of the region. Ukrainian forces managed to destroy several armored vehicles, including at least one T-90M, which is the most modern fielded main battle tank for the Russian arsenal. I say fielded because there are more modern tanks. Specifically, I'm talking about the T-14 Armata, but that is not fielded by the Russian military. It's still technically in prototype stage and development. And we do actually have some footage of this.
Спалили танк нахуй! Гореть, підар! Пизда вам! Орки єбуть!
А противотанковий?
І цей горить. Все нормально.
I think it should be relatively obvious, but your tank's not supposed to look like that. And your tank's also not supposed to look like that. Bada boom. That's what Bookham 40 says. Yeah, bada boom indeed. So actually, something kind of interesting happens. And some people may notice this, some people may, and it's not a rule of thumb. It's not an exact science because there are exceptions to every rule. But if you notice, these vehicles are burning; they're not quite exploding, and pretty sure that has to do with the air pressure inside of the vehicle. Believe it or not. So there's this thing called the Monroe effect that when a missile passes through, or it punches a hole into a turret that has the holes closed, or has its hatches closed, it basically tries to regulate the air pressure, and the air pressure difference is so great that through this tiny hole, it actually tries to suck all the air from the inside of the tank to the outside of the tank and regulate itself. It's called the Monroe effect. But if you close the hatches on a tank and you hit it with an anti-tank guided missile, it is most of the time actually more effective which is why you want to shoot a machine gun at it first. One of the reasons you want to shoot a machine gun at it first. You're actually more likely to get a catastrophic kill of the tank instead of watching it just burn, because all of that pressure is actually going to vent out the hatches. Whereas in a catastrophic kill of the tank, that's when you're going to see that ammo rack completely just detonate, and it's going to send the turret flying, however far. And part of that is just the buildup of, pressure inside of the vehicle. Not an exact science, not perfect. I've heard a lot of counter arguments to that happening, but that's what I was told. So that's what I have heard. So kind of an interesting thing, and it does seem to ring true too. From what I have seen, is hatches open, it burns. Hatches closed, it blows. That's usually how it goes. We get our daily Donetsk update here from Pavel Kolenko, covering the last 24 hours of activity inside of his area of responsibility as governor of the Donetsk Oblast. And he says, quote, on February 21st, the number of victims of Russian army in Donetsk Oblast increased by 1 killed, 1 injured. We do get this graphic from him, as we do every single day at 8 a.m. local time there. 1 person was killed in Ivanivsky, while in Antonivka, 1 person was injured. So far, the totals for civilian deaths since February the 24th of last year is so far 1,382 civilians having been killed and an additional 3,076 having been injured. And this does not include areas currently under occupation or where numbers are just simply too hard to, or where kinetic activity on the front lines is just too difficult to get effective numbers. And that means areas such as Volnovakha, the occupied city of Donetsk, or of course Mariupol, where we know tens of thousands of people have been killed, just are not factored into these accounts. JL says, regarding the tank blowing up, but the end result is the same, right? Just no big fireworks. It can be, it can't be. It really depends on how well that tank burns. So you can get things that seem like catastrophic kills, but depending on how much of an overhaul they're willing to do on the vehicle, you can get them back into action. In fact, and this goes for pretty much any engagement throughout the entirety of really armored warfare. If you look at especially on the Eastern Front during World War II, if you look at tank aces from the German army, you see that they are claiming quite large amounts of kills. And in many cases, the command actually decreased the number of kills by about 70% because most of the vehicles that were actually knocked out could be repaired and then put back into action in a short time period. Ken Brown, when the hatch blows on a hit tank, or the eardrums of the occupants burst. The occupants are on fire, so I don't think their eardrums being burst probably matters. The way that a tandem charge warhead like the tow missile or the Javelin works, the in-law would follow the same thing. Is there is 2 explosives. It's called a tandem charge warhead because there are 2 explosives on the warhead itself. And what happens is you have the precursor charge and the main charge. And the way that the main charge works, or the precursor charge hits that tank, and it basically blows up anything that's on the outside of the tank. So all those little, they look like bricks on the outside of a tank. Those are NRA, non-explosive reactive armor, or they are ERA, explosive reactive armor. 2 most common types of reactive armor available to any military service. And they blow up on the outside. They blow up, the way that those work is they blow up out and away from the tank to try and destroy that missile as it's hitting that vehicle. Very good if it's a single charge warhead like an RPG round. Very effective in that case. Tandem charge warheads are built to defeat that. The first charge, the precursor charge, hits that vehicle and it blows up that reactive armor. The second charge, the main charge of the Javelin or whatever your tandem charge warhead you're shooting at the tank, think of it like think of the inside of it kind of like a ice cream cone. Just the cone, just the waffle cone, an ice cream cone. And the way it works is the tip is toward the rear of the missile, And a small explosive charge happens just a couple microseconds, nanoseconds after that first explosive goes off, and it detonates that second. And what it does is it inverts that cone until it makes a very small projectile of molten metal, essentially. And it melts its way through a tank. So a TOW missile like that one, that's a TOW 2 Alpha, and so that one will actually make about a $50 size hole in the tank, despite its size, because it's a very fixed point of really hot metal, and it actually melts its way through the metal, and it continues to build momentum as it melts its way through that armor, and it spews all this hot molten metal of the armor and the actual explosive materials inside of the tank. And it hits on these tanks, on T-Series tanks, it hits the ammo rack in the bottom of the turret, it hits the fuel in the back, and it's so hot that it actually causes the ammunition and the fuel to cook off. They then, catch fire, and they then begin to detonate. And that's actually what causes the catastrophic kill of the tank. But that's also spreading on all of the controls and the crew, causing a very raging fire. Eventually, imagine pouring a small amount of hot magma inside of a box of TNT, and that's pretty much what you're doing with a tank when you hit it with an anti-tank guided missile. So that's how it, generally speaking, works. There's a lot more technical things that go into that, but for basic understanding, that's pretty much how they work, at least as far as I'm willing to go. A lot of stuff happening over here in kind of the Donetsk region. We actually come over here. This is right on the border of Donetsk and Luhansk, where a sports complex was actually struck here in occupied Donetsk region. This is in Debaltseve. And they said, quote, so apparently a sports complex was hit early on the 22nd or early this morning by long-range Ukrainian munitions. It's unknown as to why, but we do know that historically, as we've seen through Russian videography, that sports complexes like this one have been used as a staging point and as a barracks area for Russian forces, and also as a logistical depot for Russian forces. So due to its large size and capacity. So no casualty figures have been released yet. But we do have some photos regarding that strike. Russian forces, similar to their brothers down there in Volodar, tried to assault the city of Avdiivka here on the northern flank of the city of Donetsk, and it failed absolutely spectacularly. Much like Volodar, Russian forces were annihilated. There are very few survivors reportedly of this assault, and at least 5 BMP infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed, and at least 1 T-72 tank was destroyed. Once again, they were clustered together as they were operating unsupported, making them very easy targets for anti-tank guided missiles and for concentrated artillery fire. That is not how you want your assault to go. That's not how any armored assault should go. And this is why you do not over-rely on armored forces. Unsupported. Meanwhile, a couple of interesting things happening in generally the same area. Over here in Makivka, more strikes ended up hitting Makivka as well, as it seemed that Ukraine was firing a large amount, or had a lot of intel that they were acting on and hitting strategic sites across occupied territory. In the city of Makivka, reports of air defense systems engaging on incoming targets and a large number of explosives indicate once again another long-range precision strike by Ukrainian forces.
Ну все. Нихуя. Сейчас будет разрыв. Вон он падает. Вон оно падает.
Ярик, это я рядом. Ярик, пожалуйста.
Да погоди. Не ссы. Это грады. Нихуя себе! Еблись. Вон оно ПВО летит еще. Заебись.
Likewise, the city of Donetsk was met with a very similar fate. And also, Mariupol. So large strikes against targets occurred around Mariupol. And these long-range munitions from Ukrainian forces, it's unknown if they used long-range HIMARS, which may have already come into the country, but no confirmation as they were just announced as being provided, or if these were long-range drone strikes, which we've seen them do clear into Russian territory. And they were apparently targeting logistical sites around the city of Mariupol, with air defenses having been activated. Locals reported at least 15 separate strikes.
Что ли? А, так это химарсы летели.
Ну да.
Ой, красота, красота. Раз, два, три, четыре, пять, шесть.
It's coming from the city of Mariupol. You can see air defense systems launching into the air there from a distance. Short snippet of the explosions there, once again coming from Mariupol. But reportedly, Russian fuel depots were actually bombed on the outskirts of town, according to the advisor to the mayor of Mariupol, Petro Andrushenko. And he said 2 Russian fuel depots in the Kalmyksky district of Mariupol were eliminated. JLS, how effective are S300 or S400s? Any idea? Not a whole lot of idea, but they are relatively effective from my understanding. But they're relatively effective against things like aircraft and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, things that are easier to track, things that have been in use for a while and that they were designed to track. But we do know that up against more modern systems than when the S300 was designed, against more modern systems, even modern aircraft, if you look at the Soviet way of using their air defense systems, if you can once again look at actually the invasion of Iraq. So Saddam Hussein's air systems, or his air defense, was actually patterned after the Soviets. The Soviet Union and the Russians actually helped Saddam Hussein in Iraq, especially for the first Gulf War. They actually helped him design his air defense system for his country. So, and he had all of these batteries there. I mean, it was all former Soviet equipment. And we can see how effective they were. Now, they could be effective when used properly, I think, but the way, with as much territory as they're trying to cover, and with how well they're being targeted with some suppression or SEAD missions, suppression of enemy air defense missions, it's degraded their capabilities, and I think a lack of maintenance and lack of modernizations have degraded them as well, to an extent. Plus, they're also becoming attrited, meaning they're losing these systems and they're not exactly building new ones. So it can be very difficult. And they're trying to pull double duty. Instead of being focused just solely on air defenses, we also see them being launched as longer range MLRS systems against ground targets as opposed to air targets. So I'd say moderately effective. But against more modern systems, they come up lacking for sure. And that kind of it goes for most Soviet era equipment, even late Soviet era. At this point, it's been almost 40 years, 30 years really, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So these systems have been in use for a while and haven't really received a lot of upgrades. Against HIMARS, he says specifically, not very. They have a very difficult time tracking HIMARS missiles as they're coming in because HIMARS don't follow a easy flight path to track. If you would like an explanation, I highly recommend looking up the missile doesn't know where it is on YouTube. It's pretty amazing, amazingly descriptive. We see that the Ukrainian Air Force is operating very heavily, though, all throughout the front, and we see quite a lot of things being used. So the Ukrainian Air Force at this point is operating across the entirety of the front lines. Whether you're talking about Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, you're talking about Kherson, doesn't matter. And they're mostly providing support for troops on the ground. We see the Su-25 Frogfoots, which are a ground attack role fighter aircraft or ground attack role aircraft, being used quite heavily. Mi-24 Hind, of course, also known as the Flying Bathtub or the Flying Tank, affectionately. Ground attack helicopter and also transport helicopter. The Mi-8 AMTSH, which is a ground attack helicopter converted from a transport helicopter, the Mi-8 platform, as well as the U.S. donated Mi-17s operating as transport and medevac helicopters. And a very surprising new addition I found today was at least one UH-60M Black Hawk helicopter. It's a Sikorsky helicopter, and it's not known if this was officially provided by the U.S. or an ally, or if this was a privately donated one, as there are private UH-60s in circulation, just not a lot of them. What we can see here is Ukrainian Su-25 Frogfoots operating here on the front lines. And you can see he's popping flares as he's launching those rockets. He's going to launch all of his rockets all at once, just like we see with the other aircraft. These are ground attack. They're flying in a flight or a pair, and he's immediately going to break. He's going to be flying in at low level, pitching that nose up, and he's going to launch all of his rockets in one go, and he's going to immediately pop chaff and flares to prevent lock-on, and he's going to dive back down as he breaks contact. That's going to prevent them from getting shot down and having a long time. It's going to limit how long the enemy has to lock onto them. Here's an Mi-8 AMTSH, which is conducting the same thing, another flight of them. He's going to pitch that nose up. After flying low level, he's going to let all those rockets go, and he's immediately going to break contact, and he's going to start diving and turning away. And that gives him extra range on those rockets, and it gives him some more, standoff against, the man pads, the Iglas and the Strelas that the Russians are going to be using, similar to the Stinger missiles. And it's going to prevent them from having a chance to really lock on and engage them. And this is the UH-60 and Mi-24 Hind. So this is a UH-60M Black Hawk helicopter. You can see it is in Ukrainian service. This is coming from Ukrainian pilots. They do have their NATO headgear there on and NATO equipment, of course, as we've seen. And, of course, that is the Mi-24 Hind. A very effective aircraft. And we can see that they have, other forces with them, too. I'm unsure if this is them or if these guys are going to be in the Hind or in the UH-60 or what. Usually, if you're transporting high-level officials or doing some kind of specialized work, you're going to have a security team that actually goes with the bird as an escort. So once they land, they actually provide security for the bird itself and also for whatever high-level official is there. So it is actually kind of common to have attachments. But usually those attachments are going to be provided by whatever unit has that high-level officer or official that's going with them. It's part of their own detail usually, at least for what I have had. I've had friends that did those details before. And this is one of the U.S. donated Mi-17s. Obviously, very beautiful bird. You can see this thing's already spooled up and running. A very big aircraft, so you don't want to put these too close to the front line, but it makes them really good for medevacs, and we've seen medevacs here look lately. So pretty cool to see them still operating. We also see some specially designed gloves for drone operators. Drones have proved a very important role, and we don't want those guys' hands getting cold. So we have specially designed gloves now, apparently, that you can put your hand through them, and you can operate the drone control panel from inside of them. And this is coming from a Ukrainian company who can now operate these things and not have to worry about. Now these guys don't have to worry about their hands getting cold as they're using these. Pretty cool. I mean, it's something small, but quality of life things are a huge deal. Especially something so simple. Fortunately, a Zaporizhia suburb was shelled. Russian forces launching retaliatory strikes against a lot of locations over the last 48 hours as a result of the recent Ukrainian strikes deep into Russian-occupied territory. They launched these strikes at a residential area in a suburb of the city of Zaporizhia itself. This is also correlated with the Ukrainian Red Cross. We can see the damage to those civilian houses here. There were no casualties reported. We just didn't get any figures whatsoever. But it's hard to believe that there wouldn't be. It's coming from the National Police of Ukraine. And unfortunately, the big story of the night comes out of Kherson, where our last report actually had us with Kherson talking about the use of incendiary munitions. Once again, Russian forces shelled the city of Kherson, this time with very devastating results. Quote, Russian occupiers shelled Kherson on February 21st. The attacks have targeted a vehicle park, residential areas, a high-rise building, and a public transport stop. 5 people were killed and 16 citizens were wounded. And that's coming from the Kherson City Council. Remnants of one of those shells. It's coming from Come Back Alive, or Back and Alive, which has been a nonprofit that's been operating in Ukraine since 2014. It's coming from the Ukrainian Red Cross, which is also the thumbnail for the night. They were assisting in casualties there. Elena Zelenska, on her official Twitter, First Lady of Ukraine. The most devastating strike appears to have been that that public transit stop. Public bus stop, essentially. Where, unfortunately, there's some very brutal cinematography coming from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And the National Police of Ukraine. Then here we can see the impact right there on that residential building. You can see where it punched that hole right there and blasted out that section and all the fragmentation that went around it. As this one's buried itself into the ground as it detonated. Absolutely horrific results. And there are some more very much graphic photos that and video that did come out from this that does show the casualties, but we have marked that 18+, but we still think that is something to note here. That's actually everything inside of the country of Ukraine, but that's not it for the news, as there's plenty of others that are coming in from around the world. And we actually start off in Russia, where we have a couple of different things. Something that very much sickens me is the usage of children, and it's gone past Russian children now. It has now moved to Ukrainian children. A Ukrainian child is asked to hug a Russian soldier, specifically the commander of military forces around the city of Mariupol during its besiegement. On stage in Russia, here in Moscow, during the concert that was held yesterday, a girl from Mariupol was crying and spoke on stage saying, quote, "Thank you for saving me. Sorry, I forgot the rest of the speech words." And then the girl and a group of Ukrainian kids were asked to hug the commanding officer.
Анечка, умничка, не стесняйся, говори. Мы с тобой, мы рядом.
Спасибо дяде Юре за то, что он меня, мою сестру и сотни тысяч детей спас с Мариуполя. Я чуть-чуть
Анюта, не стесняйся. Можешь подойти и обнять. Смотри, дети, давайте все обнимемся. Посмотрите, вот он, тот, кто вас спас.
Не зря позывной ангел, правда? Юрий Леонидович, вам слово.
I want to remind you, Fair says that I don't personally think she's from Mariupol. It's quite possible that she's not from Mariupol. It wouldn't surprise me. But if she is, and if the other children are, it's pretty horrifying to think about. You have to think how many children were, we just talked about it. I mean, you come over here and you go to child casualty updates. 16,221 were deported. Under the 1949 Geneva Conventions and further outlined under the 1993 Rome Statute, the forceful removal of children from one group to another group, including based off of national lines, is actually genocide. Mariupol is 90% destroyed. It's over 90% destroyed. 90% of the city will have to be completely demolished and rebuilt. There are multiple mass grave sites around the city, at least 8 that we have reported on just here on the channel, with over 16,000 people identified via Maxar satellite footage of being killed in the Battle of Mariupol, in the siege of Mariupol. The Mariupol maternity clinic bombing, that happened during a ceasefire for humanitarian corridors. The bombing of the Mariupol Drama Theater, 2 Fab 500 kilogram bombs were dropped onto the Mariupol Drama Theater, which had children painted on both sides of the theater very clearly in Russian. Killed over 600, an estimated over 600 people. They're using it as a bomb shelter. During a ceasefire. Happened during a ceasefire. So to then turn around and use them for propaganda is horrifying. Her family was likely killed. Her city was destroyed, and everything she has known and loved was destroyed, saying she's actually from Mariupol. And she was forcefully taken from her family, flown, or whatever was left of it, flown to Russia, and is now forced to do a speech in front of the entirety of Russia in downtown Moscow at a stadium for the Russians, who just killed her entire, essentially who probably killed her entire family, destroyed her home, destroyed her childhood, and forced her into a family that she doesn't want to be with if she's even with a family. And now she has to hug the man that orchestrated all of that for her city, and is forced to memorize a speech for it. As we continue on here, I see people talking about nuclear weapons, and there's a reason why this is in everyone's mind because of Putin's address yesterday. I specifically am not covering Putin's address yesterday because aside from what I'm getting ready to talk about, there really wasn't anything new. And I know that was the thing, and this is exactly the reason why on last stream I said I'm not going to make any guesses because he could declare war, he could just go off on a ramble. I have no idea what the guy's going to do, and I'm not going to take a guess. And the reason I say this is because of exactly what we saw yesterday. It was the exact same rhetoric we've been seeing for a year. The Nazi Kiev regime, biolaboratories, Western aggression, NATO aggression, a proxy war through NATO, U.S. imperialism, genocide of the Donbass and Russian-speaking people. The LPR and DPR are legitimate states. The annexation of Russia, Crimea is a red line, and the only thing that was different in this, by the way, the faces on everyone attending this, half of them were falling asleep on live national television during this address. It's really impressive to see how little people wanted to listen to this. Because there was nothing different. There was no declaration of war. There was no, general mobilization or anything really all that important. It's just the same crap that's been said for the last year and well over that. But the only thing different is the fact that he said, I would like the State Duma to suspend our participation in the START treaty, and if the United States begins testing nuclear weapons, we shall as well. And Russia has and then the day after this, right? The day after this speech, he stated, or it has now officially come out that Russia is officially suspending their participation in the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or the New START, which limits the deployable nuclear warheads for the United States and Russia. It was signed in 2010, and this is one of the continuations of the SALT treaties of the Cold War era. The State Duma passed the first draft of this law unanimously the day after he states he wants it done in the national address. Unanimously, not one dissenting vote. Not even one abstention in the State Duma. 100% everyone voted yes to do this. And it's very unlikely that Russia will actually go through and continue participation with the treaty and will likely withdraw from it altogether. And this is coming from the Russian State Duma themselves. This is duma.gov.ru. The State Duma. Relevant members of the State Duma supported suspension of the treaty between Russia and the USA on measures of the further reduction and limitation of strategic offensive arms. The relevant draft law was unanimously adopted by members of the State Duma. At the day before, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted the need to adopt that measure in his presidential address. Members of the State Duma at a plenary meeting unanimously adopted the law, quote, on the suspension of the Russian Federation of the treaty between the Russian Federation and the United States of America on the measures of further reduction of limitation of strategic offensive arms. The day before, it was submitted by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So he personally submitted this to the Duma. The document suspends the treaty concluded in Prague on 8 April 2010, and the decision to renew the treaty will be made by the President of the Russian Federation. The law comes into force as of the date of its official publication. And of course, all of the further. And what's the first thing? What is the very first thing that the Russian embassy in Kenya posts? They say we are no longer being part of START, and immediately post one of the offensive nuclear launchers as the main photo for this. Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Russian Federation found itself in a radically new security environment resulting from Washington's extreme hostility and efforts to stir up confrontation. It is no longer possible to maintain business as usual with the U.S. and the West in general. And that is regarding the Foreign Ministry statement in connection to the Russian Federation suspending the New START Treaty. Brewster Redbeard said ICBMs can be shot down. That is true. They certainly can be shot down. Only during their initial climb, though. Once they reach altitude, they separate into multiple nuclear warheads going to separate targets, and there's no longer a chance for interception. We continue here and into the rest of Europe. We're coming out of Vienna. 5,000 heart-shaped candles were lit up in Vienna, Austria, as to pay tribute to the suffering of millions of Ukrainian children caused by the Russian war in Ukraine. I see a lot of people talking about, hey, watch Moldova. And as you may notice, there are no points in Moldova right now. So, Moldova has, and this is the hot topic right now regarding Moldova, that there's a part of Moldova that's been a breakaway region since essentially the collapse of the Soviet Union, very shortly after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And in Moldova, this region is this little edge region right here that borders Ukraine. It's called Transnistria. It's part of the Carpathians, the Carpathian mountainous region of Moldova. It's a breakaway region, and because it's a Russian-speaking region, of course, what does a primarily Russian-speaking region of Moldova, of course, what does Russia do? We're going to put 1,500, or we're going to put a task force of Russian troops here, and 1,500 troops there in the Transnistria region. Moldova continues to have issues there. It very much wants them out, and because of different talks of things, Moldova has put out several different things saying that there's major national security concerns. And the latest one is that the Russians may forcefully take a major airport there in the country of Moldova to bolster forces there in Transnistria. So that is the concern. We're worried about Russian military action in Moldova, but outside of just different sources claiming separate things, including, possibly a forced takeover of an airport there in Moldova, if the Russians intend to do something like that, outside of allegations and claims, there really isn't a whole lot to go on. And so we aren't really covering that unless something concrete, pops up here, which is why you may not see that. But I think it's worth addressing because people keep saying, hey, watch Moldova, watch Moldova. We are watching Moldova, but there's nothing concrete yet. It's just allegations. The metropolitan city of Venice, here in Italy, the Venice canals are actually running dry due to drought and low tides. And these are the world-renowned canals that everyone knows and loves about the city of Venice. It's the icon of the city. And it's usually threatened by flooding, but weeks of dry winter weather have made it impossible for the gondolas, water taxis, and ambulances to navigate the waterways. Concerns over the never-ending severe drought come on the heels of another emergency that was heightened last summer, which saw less than half of the amount of normal snowfall in the Alpine mountains and caused the country's rivers and lakes to suffer. The city, famous for its canals, is now just gets to stare at the mud that was the bottom. And then coming out of Dorset, here in the United Kingdom, the Defense Secretary for the United Kingdom, Ben Wallace, ended up visiting Ukrainian troops while they were training. He ended up visiting the local Royal Army base there in Dorset and to meet with Ukrainian troops training on the Challenger 2, a main battle tank, and other assets. Thousands of Ukrainian troops continue to train in the UK as well as elsewhere throughout Europe, either going through basic military courses, about a 5-week course with NATO-led instructors, or on other more specific UK weapon systems. We can see some photos here of them working on getting some maintenance done on the Challenger 2. So it does take a full team to do this kind of work. It takes a whole ground crew. It takes a lot. These guys working here, training. I've seen this photo of Ben Wallace, and by the way, Ben Wallace is by himself as a politician, a mad lad in the United Kingdom. I mean, that man, a lot of people were actually pressuring him to, try and become prime minister. He's like, no, I like my job. Like, I have an important job. I'm doing good things with this job. I'm staying here. They need me here. So he was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that crap. I ain't got time for that. I got better things to do. And I've seen an amazing comment on this of when you see them commies give them both barrels. I like to imagine what Ben Wallace was saying in that photo to that Ukrainian guy. Here are Ukrainian troops training on the AS-90. AS-90 is a self-propelled artillery platform. It's based off of the M109A3 Paladin, 155mm self-propelled gun. Once again, more self-propelled artillery, the better. And elsewhere in Europe, of course, we're seeing the Leopards, of course, still undergoing, they're still training undergoing with them as well, both in Poland, Germany, and elsewhere. We continue down here and into the Middle East, and we actually start off here in Syria. Right here, this is the border city of Qamishli. Qamishli. There we go. Here in Qamishli, which is here in Al-Hasaka province, this is in northeastern Syria. 2 people were actually killed during a UAV attack, and presumably by Turkish armed forces on a car in the province of Al-Hasaka. The incident took place near the town of Qamishli. According to the preliminary data, the commanders of the Arab Kurdish forces were killed. Turkish resources claim that they were involved in organizing a terror attack in Istanbul, meaning they attacked the SDF. This is usually, by the way, pronounced with a K if you are Romanizing it, I should say, because this is actually, there used to be an air, there's actually a C-130 accessible airfield up here. This is where the Russians captured that airfield, by the way. We come down here and into, or sorry, I almost missed one, down here and into Dara, where a car bomb ended up killing several soldiers. Yesterday morning, in the city of Dara, a car bomb exploded at a checkpoint in the Syrian military, and according to local sources, several soldiers were killed and wounded. I missed a news story in Italy. You mean Venice? I got Venice. People accusing me of stuff. And as we continue with this story here in Dara, it became known that yesterday's incident at one of the checkpoints in the city of Dara was an explosion of a magnetic mine fixed to the bottom of a car. Among the victims was Ahmed Jabbar Nayef al-Abiyat, a an official with the province's Social Affairs and Labor Department. The deceased was an associate of Brigadier General Laya Al-Ali, who was part of the leadership of the military council of the government forces there in the province of Dara. Fortunately, we do move here into the West Bank in Palestine, specifically here in Nablus. Israeli forces ended up conducting a raid in Nablus, which killed at least 10 Palestinians. And in the West Bank of the Jordan River, during a counterterrorism operation, quote unquote, the Israeli Special Services eliminated 4 militants of the Palestinian groups. The operation that took place in the city of Nablus, where members of the Aran al-Azwad and Saraya al-Quds group became the targets of the Israeli military. The security forces surrounded the house and offered them to surrender, to which the militants opened fire. During the skirmish, 2 field commanders of the Palestinian groups were neutralized. After that, the Palestinians and militants of the Palestinian armed groups came to the area of the operations and started shooting the soldiers and Israeli armed forces. With return fire, the military eliminated 2 shooters and killed 5 passerbys. More than 100 Palestinians were also injured. Some of them are in critical condition. I'm going to point this out because I think it should be pointed out. Your special operations to conduct a small, fast raid to capture or kill 4 militants should not ever, in any way, shape, or form, result in over 100 civilians being injured. It should also not kill 5 passerbys. That is excessive beyond measure. That means that in order for that to happen means it had to have been created into a free fire zone. And that is unacceptable in a very highly populated area without a very big prior notice, a much larger military presence, and without, trying or attempting to evacuate civilian populations based off of the Geneva Convention's international law. That is unacceptable. Civilian casualties happen, and that's understandable. But as someone who has had to deal with and do counterterrorism operations, that is completely unacceptable. That is purposeful. You have to try to do that. You have to legitimately try to do that. In any situation, you legitimately have to try to get that figure. To do that kind of thing. Which I don't care what bad sentiments exist or whatever regarding. It doesn't matter what sentiments existed or do exist or have existed for the last 6,000 years. In 2023 AD, it is unacceptable to conduct a counterterrorism operation to capture or kill 4 people to end up injuring and killing over 100. there is no acceptable, like, level to that. There is no oops, there is no, you have to try to do that. Like, it's impossible to fathom how you do that on accident. I cannot think of a way without just dropping a bomb in the middle of a group of people. I cannot think of a way to conduct a counterterrorism raid like this was using special operations forces, and then immediately in a small group of special operations forces, and that turned into over 100 people being killed and injured in the process. There is no way outside of the Air Force dropping a bomb on a group of people that should ever be possible in one quick go. On accident. That is, in all of my years of experience, Welcome 40 asks, are you a fan of the expansion of special operations forces over the last 20 years? They seem to be too big for their britches. Yes and no. Special operations forces have expanded because the need for them to, their needs have expanded. Their needs and their roles have expanded quite significantly. You're talking about special operations essentially leads, counterterrorism operations now throughout the world. I mean, when you're talking about what's happening in Africa, right, like the U.S. involvement in counterterrorism operations in Africa, that's special operations forces. You're talking about what's going on in Syria, predominantly special operations forces. You're talking about what's happening in Iraq, predominantly special operations forces. You're talking about any military operation really throughout the world, you're not really seeing, standard ground forces operating heavily. Right? I was probably the last group. I was part of the last bit of generation because I was part of the buildup for the fight against the Islamic State. A much smaller buildup than, say, Iraq and Afghanistan, but it's still a small buildup to meet that threat. And, we were doing much more kinetic things when I was there because of that time, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, that's really the destruction of the caliphate. And so, there was a need to have standard ground troops doing things and being attached to special operations forces, but they were operating predominantly. They were in charge of us. We were directly attached when I was in Syria. So I was, living and eating and working with these guys every single day, not just holding security for them, but going out on patrols and stuff, clearing buildings and stuff. It was, but they have a, that next skill set, that next level of, yes, lethality and effectiveness on the battlefield, but they have that next level of training of making those quick decisions, and many times also having that, very specialized training in things like hostage rescue situations and demolitions and things, very clandestine things too, that make them very effective, for some of these roles. But they're also light units. They're not meant to be in sustained combat. I don't believe that all of the roles they're being used for are special operations roles. They're roles that could be done by somebody else, and special operations could be used in much better regards, much more within their doctrine. Special operations forces don't have to lead the push on the anti terrorism measures. They don't. You can easily send the Marine Expeditionary Unit that is currently partying in the Mediterranean right now, waiting for something to kick off somewhere, so they can fly in and fly out after the CENTCOM forces relieve them. You could have them go to Africa and go into AFRICOM, and you can have them be doing patrols. And you can have them providing the support for Somalia. And you could have them. I mean, it'd be easy. They're already there. You have a MU there. It's why they're there. It's a Marine Expeditionary Unit. Specifically meant for anti-crises and things like that. Or just set up because, just like in Central Command, there is a, Special Purpose MAGTF Crisis Response African Command. There's the exact same thing as what is operating in the Middle East, in Africa, but the mission's not nearly as big. Even though Africa is the forefront of the fight against extremism and terrorism right now, according to the Morocco conference last year. So that's my opinion on Special Operations Forces. Very good at their job, very knowledgeable, very smart, very intelligent, very effective. Overused, I think. And as Bookham 40 is still talking here in the chat, he says many scandals undermine professionalism, and he thinks that they need closer supervision and constraints. And I think that it's not that they need more supervision and constraints, because operating independently is part of our doctrine, but I think that there needs to be more accountability. I think when you're looking at a lot of things that have happened in the past, and I can say the same thing for the Marine Corps and any military branch of service. The Haditha massacres, they did not get justice. At all. Did not get justice. The Marines of 3-6 did not get punished as they should have. And I can say the same thing about Special Operations Forces that operated in Afghanistan and committed very terrible things in Afghanistan. Did not get their due punishment, I don't think. And I understand that there's a culture. I understand that there is, wanting to not Blue Falcon your friends. But there is some integrity that needs to be there, and there needs to be accountability for unjust actions. I'm not saying as a leader you're going to make bad decisions. The point is that you make a decision. But that is when you're in combat and dealing with a situation. That's not doing blatantly violations of many things, policies, special, rules of engagement, talking about doing, just massacring people, killing people for the sake of killing people. There is a dark sense, military is very dark. It has a dark purpose, and there is a dark culture that goes with that. Hell, when I went to Baghdad, they rotated us out partially because we were scaring the people that we had just saved. Because we were saying some very dark things that they were like, whoa, well, yeah, you brought infantry Marines that are here, our sole purpose in life is to destroy the enemy, and you brought us here to use non-lethals against 4,000 people that are currently burning your house down. What did you think was going to happen? We never did anything, but yeah, we joked about it. We talked about it because it's the dark culture. But there's a difference between joking and talking about it with your friends and your buddies and it being overheard and going out and doing it. We didn't just rip a machine gun through a crowd of people. Like, that would just be unacceptable. It would not be okay. And everyone there understands that. You can't just go ahead and do that. There's a difference between that. And that has happened. So, I don't agree with punishing bad decisions made because of the situation at the moment. Leaders are going to make bad decisions. Everyone does. And in combat, it matters that you make a decision. But punishment for things that didn't need to be, that didn't need to happen at all, that are just completely unacceptable in behavior, should definitely have accountability. In 3-6, their friend was killed by an IED. They were upset. I can't imagine that. We never in our unit took a KIA where I was over there. We did have KIAs, but we didn't have any in my unit specifically. No one I knew super well and just acquainted with. And, so I can't imagine that. But those Marines didn't need to kill all those people in Haditha in retaliation. A bad decision's calling in a bomb on the wrong target. The decision that shouldn't have been made is going into the house and knowingly killing everyone inside of it. We'll move on to Iran off of that subject. And here in Iran, 2 earthquakes ended up hitting Iran in less than 24 hours. The U.S. Geological Survey reported that the earthquake measuring 5.3 in magnitude occurred northwest of Bandar Abbas in Iran. The earthquake occurred at 9:35 a.m. this morning, local time, at a depth of 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles from the surface of the Earth. And less than 24 hours later, the Earthquake Center of the Institute of Geophysics in the University of Tehran announced that another earthquake had occurred at 4:41 a.m. local time on Wednesday at a depth of 11 kilometers or 6.8 miles from the surface. The director of emergencies in the Fars province, Khalil Abdullahi, announced that the rescue teams have been dispatched to the site of the event and there have not been any reports of casualties thus far. In Kabul, yesterday, a Toyota Hilux pickup truck was blown up by an IED in the second security district of the Afghan capital. There were no casualties, according to Khalid Zadran, a spokesman for the Kabul Taliban police. The incident is being investigated. We jump down here and into Africa, where in Kherson in Burkina Faso, the Islamic State militants ended up launching yet another attack on Burkina Faso's military. And while authorities were trying to calculate casualties from the last ambush, a military base in Kherson in the Udlan province was attacked Monday night. Data on the losses during the battle vary. They say from 20 to 100 soldiers were killed, and there are no other details yet. For now, the Islamic State has remained silent about the attacks, but it is suspected that it was carried out by them. While in Mali, an IED ended up killing 3 Senegalese military personnel. The roadside IED explosion killed 3 Senegalese military personnel from the UN peacekeeping mission there. 5 more were injured in the incident. The incident occurred in the Mopti district near the town of Bandiagara. No one has yet taken responsibility for that attack. In Paraguay, 12,000 sick from the chikungunya fever. I'm so sorry for screwing that up. According to the government, 11,864 Paraguayans have been affected with chikungunya, 23 of whom have died. During the week, 2,389 chikungunya infections and 37 dengue fever infections were diagnosed. If you want some more information, PLEnglish.com has more on their article. Archinstinct says, do you think the Russian offensive has failed already? What Russian offensive? Is my response to that. This one's going to blow your mind. It blew mine for a while. Buildings are currently being made out of cocaine in Ecuador. According to the Ecuadorian police, the number of drugs seized in the country during 2021 has doubled compared to 2020. Now there is not enough space for storing the drugs in police warehouses, and as a result, authorities have decided to deliver the packages of seized cocaine to processing plants. There it is mixed with cement, sand, and water to form concrete. 200 tons of cocaine were seized in Ecuador in 2021, coming out to a rough black market valuation of $5.41 billion USD. In case you're wondering, because I'm probably on a list now and it doesn't matter, the valuation for 1 kilo of cocaine in the United States is roughly $29,750 per kilo, with the low end being about $14,500 in San Diego and the high end being about $45,000 in Alaska. According to the street prices there, apparently. Yeah. So, that's 1 kilo. About 2.2 pounds of cocaine is 1 kilo. It's $29,000. And you multiply that by 2,000 pounds per ton, 200 tons, and you get that whopping number. Please don't deal drugs, kids. It's not worth it. 17 ended up dying after a traffic accident here in Puebla, Mexico. 17 migrants from Central America, Colombia, and Venezuela died after an accident on Sunday, February 19th at a highway in Puebla. 15 died on site and 2 died in the hospital after the accident. The truck overturned around 2:30 p.m. local time on the Oaxaca Conapalan Highway, kilometer 88 marker. According to the press conference, 45 undocumented foreigners were on board the bus. And if you would like some more information on that, monitoramos.com does have more for you. But that is all of the heavy-hitting news across the world right now. But that doesn't mean that is the end of the news entirely. And so, as we go down here, we can actually check out a couple of different things that popped out. Coming out of Huntsville, Alabama, NASA's Chandra discovers a giant black holes on a collision course. A new study using NASA's Chandra X-ray Observatory has tracked 2 pairs of supermassive black holes in dwarf galaxies on collision courses. This is the first evidence for such an impending encounter, providing scientists with an important information about the growth of black holes in the early universe. So we can now see those 2 black holes that are currently sitting there on the collision course. My co-host is going crazy again. I apologize. Say hello to the world. No? Okay. Very well. Pretty sure there's a TikTok trend for that, isn't there? Well, you jump over here and into Paris. Hubble ended up discovering a triple galaxy merger. The NASA ESA Hubble Space Telescope has captured what appears to be a triple galaxy merger in the process, in progress, as well as tumultuous mixture of star formations and tidal distortions caused by the gravitational interactions of the galaxy SYRIA. The center of the image is obscured by a thick cloud of dust. The light from the background galaxy can be seen piercing through the outer extremities. This ought to be interesting. Whoa. It's pretty wild. So this is 3 galaxies forming into each other. Yeah, by the way, my co-host there, Inky, hates catnip. Doesn't care. Does not like catnip. She's just crazy. I don't get it. My other cat loves catnip. Inky does not like catnip. Doesn't care for it. Never has. Don't understand. Ever since she was a little kitten, you could fit in the palm of my hand. Never cared about catnip. I don't understand why. Doesn't like the spray. Doesn't like the toys made out of catnip. Doesn't like anything. I bet you got the inside info from your co-host about the black market pricing. No. No, actually. So the reason I say I'm on the list is because I searched Google for that. Though I'm probably on a list for most of these sources anyway. And the fact that my background literally has a TOW-2 missile in the back of it, but it's just the tube, guys. There is no warhead in that. I might have to bring it down one of these days and prove it to you. But yeah, so I'm sure I'm already on a list. But you can actually just find anything on Google. But with that, that is actually everything in the news tonight. I hope that you guys have found this knowledgeable. I hope that you guys don't suddenly use the, average black market street price for cocaine for anything nefarious. Please stay away from drugs. And it's probably not good for you to look it up on your computer. Let me do that for you. And with that, there's a lot of people that are suffering for a lot of these reasons. For a lot of reasons, whether you're talking about the war in Ukraine, you talk about what's happening in the Middle East, the earthquakes, whatever. There's a lot of stuff happening that is affecting a lot of people, and we want to do as much good for these people as possible. So please be sure to check out the video description below, and please check out all those links. 70% or more of the donations that they receive go directly to the program, so 30% or less going to salaries and administrative costs. And if you have more, send them to us. We're constantly looking to add to that list. Please be sure to like and subscribe, of course, to help us continue, supporting this channel and continuing to do the work that we do and grow this project to help even more people throughout the world. Once again, as a reminder, we will not be streaming either tomorrow night or on Friday night because we will be releasing tomorrow at 10 p.m. We will be premiering our short documentary for 1 year of the war in Ukraine. Please be sure to go and check that out. It's been a lot of work that has been gone into this. It will be our first official video of the channel. We're looking to do more content. So if you have any content ideas as well, feel free to throw them into the comments of this video. And we'll go ahead and go check those out. And possibly we can make a video on your idea there. So if you have anything you want to know, go ahead and throw it down there. We'll be happy to try and see if we can't fit it in and try and work something on it. But with that, I hope that you guys remain safe. I hope that you and your family and your friends remain safe. And if not, I do hope that you find that safety and security in the very near future. We hope that you enjoy that video on the premiere tomorrow night and that you guys will be joining us. And I hope that you guys will be joining us as well on Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, or 4 p.m. Central, we'll recover the last 72 hours worth of news. But with that, my name is Paul from the New News, and have a good one, everybody. I'll talk to you guys later. Alrighty, bye.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Нам не треба ні конфлікту, ні війни. Та ми готові всіх вас звать до сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шверхуйло. То для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стоять до волноваги, і чудно кличе, діти нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим людям с кирпичом ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. І стрія до волновахи, і чудно кличе, ідіть нахуй, тут працює ЗСУ і ТРО. Ідіть нахуй.